Howdy, folks. This is the beginning of my recordings of the Hand of Thrawn duology. The first book in that series is called Specter of the Past. In preparation for this, I did kind of do a quick glance over the timeline to see everything that happened in between the original Thrawn trilogy and this duology. Initially, my plan was to try and summarize everything that happened in that period. There's about 10 or 11 years here that have passed, if I remember correctly. And I quickly decided there's too much here to summarize, and some of it is nonsense. So I'm going to skip over that, other than to tell you that Luke has restarted his Jedi Academy by this point. He's had several students. Han and Leia have had a third child named Anakin. The Dark Empire series happened, so for a brief time, Luke turned to the dark side and had joined a cloned emperor. Um, there was a couple of fairly major conflicts that took place. The one is called the Black Fleet Crisis. The other is the Corellian trilogy, is what it refers to. It's a fairly Han-centric story. That's what takes place pretty much immediately before this. If you guys want to research the details on that, you can. If I come across something that the book mentions that I think maybe confuses you because you haven't read those stories, I might try and touch on it on the end papers if I remember those details. But other than that, I'm just going to jump straight in. Chapter 1. Slowly, silently, its lights a faint glimmer of life amid the darkness, the Imperial Star Destroyer Chimaera glided through space. Empty space. Oppressively dark space. Long, lonely light years from the nearest of the tiny islands that were the star systems of the galaxy, drifting at the edge of the boundary between the outer rim worlds and the vast regions of territory known as unknown space, at the very edge of the Empire. Or rather, at the edge of the pitiful scraps of what had once been the Empire. Standing beside one of the Chimera's side viewports, Admiral Pelion, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet, gazed out at the emptiness, the weight of all too many years pressing heavily across his shoulders. Too many years, too many battles, too many defeats. Perhaps the Chimera's bridge crew was feeling the weight too. Certainly the sounds of activity going on behind him seemed more muted than usual today. But perhaps it was merely the effect of being out here, so far from anywhere at all. No, of course that had to be it. The men of the Chimera were the finest the fleet had to offer. They were Imperial officers and crewers, and Imperials didn't give up. Ever. There was a tentative footstep at his side. Admiral, Captain Artis said quietly. We're ready to begin, sir. For a moment, Pelion's mind flashed back 10 years to another very similar moment. Then it had been Pelion and Grand Admiral Thrawn who'd been here on the Chimera's bridge, watching the final test of the prototype cloaking shield Thrawn had recovered from among the Emperor's trophies inside Mount Tantus. Pelion could remember the excitement he'd felt then, despite his misgivings about the insane Jedi clone Jorus Sabaoth, as he watched Thrawn single-handedly breathing new life and vigor back into the Empire. But Mount Tantus was gone, destroyed by agents of the New Republic and Sabaoth's own madness and treason. And Grand Admiral Thrawn was dead. And the Empire was dying. With an effort, Pelion shook the shadows of the past away. He was an Imperial officer, and Imperials didn't give up. Thank you, he said to Ardif. At your convenience, Captain. Yes, sir. Ardif half turned, gestured to the fighter coordinator in the portside crew pit. Signal the attack, he ordered. The officer acknowledged and gestured in turn to one of his crewers. Pelion turned his attention back to the viewport, just in time to see 8 Sorosub Praybird-class starfighters in tight formation roar in from behind them. Cutting tight to the Chimera's command superstructure, they passed over the forward ridge line, raking it with low-power blaster fire, then split smoothly out in 8 different directions, Corkscrewing out and forward, they kept up their fire until they were out of the Star Destroyer's primary attack zone. Then, curving smoothly around, they swung around and regrouped. "Admiral?" Ardif prompted. "Let's give them one more pass, Captain," Pelion said. "The more flight data the predictor has to work with, the better it should function." He caught the eye of one of the crew pit officers. "Damage report?" "Minor damage to the forward ridge line, sir," the officer reported. "One sensor array knocked out, leaving 5 turbolasers without ranging data." "Acknowledged." All theoretical damage, of course, calculated under the assumption that the Praebirds were using full-power capital ship turbolasers. Pelion had always loved war games when he was younger, had relished the chance to play with techniques and tactics without the risk of true combat. Somewhere in all those years, the excitement had faded away. "Helm, bring us around 20 degrees to starboard," he ordered. "Starboard turbolasers will lay down dispersion fire as they make their next pass." The Praebirds were back in tight formation now, once again approaching their target. The Chimaera's turbolasers opened up as they came, their low-level fire splattering across the Praebirds' overlapping deflector shields. For a few seconds, the opponents traded fire. Then the Praebirds broke formation again, splitting apart like the fingertips of an opening hand. Twisting over and under the Chimaera, they shot past, scrambling for the safety of distance. "Damage report?" Pelion called. "3 starboard turbolaser batteries knocked out," the officer called back. "We've also lost 1 tractor beam projector and 2 ion cannon." "Enemy damage?" "1 attacker appears to have lost his deflector shields, and 2 others are reading diminished turbolaser capability." "Hardly counts as damage," Ardif murmured. "Of course, the situation here isn't exactly fair. Ships that small and maneuverable would never have the kinds of shields or firepower we're crediting them with." "If you want fairness, organize a shockball tournament," Pelion said acidly. "Don't look for it in warfare." Ardif's cheek twitched. "I'm sorry, sir." Pelion sighed. The finest the Imperial fleet had to offer. "Stand by the cloaking shield, Captain," he ordered, watching the faint drive glows as the Praebirds regrouped again in the distance. "Activate on my command." "Yes, Admiral." There was a sudden flare of drive glow, partially eclipsed by the Praebirds themselves, as the enemy kicked into high acceleration. "Here they come," Pelion said, watching as the single glowing dot rapidly resolved itself into 8 close formation ships. "Lock predictor into fire control. Stand by cloaking shield." "Predictor and cloaking shield standing by," Ardif confirmed. Pelion nodded, his full attention on the Praebirds. Nearly to the point where they'd broken formation last time. "Cloaking shield! Now!" And with a brief flicker of bridge lighting, the stars and incoming Praebirds vanished as the cloaking shield plunged the Chimaera into total darkness. "Cloaking shield activated and stabilized," Ardif said. "Helm, come around port side, 30 degrees by 8, Pelion ordered. Ahead acceleration point 1. Turbolasers, fire." "Acknowledged," an officer called. "Turbolasers are firing." Pelion took a step closer to the viewport and looked down along the Chimaera's sides. The faint blasts of low-level fire were visible, lancing a short distance out from the Star Destroyer and then disappearing as they penetrated the spherical edge of the Star Destroyer's cloaking shield. Blinded by the very device that was now shielding it from its opponent's view, the Chimaera was firing wildly in an attempt to destroy those opponents. Or, perhaps not quite so wildly. If the predictor worked as well as its designers hoped, perhaps the Empire still had a chance in this war. It was a long time before the Chimaera's turbolasers finally ceased fire. Far too long. "Is that it?" he asked Ardif. "Yes, sir," the other said. 500 shots, as pre-programmed." Pelion nodded. "Deactivate cloaking shield. Let's see how well we did." There was another flicker from the lights, and the stars were back. Mentally crossing his fingers, Pelion peered out the viewport. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from the starboard, he spotted an approaching drive glow. There were 7 of them splitting apart. "Signal from adversary commander, Admiral," the comm officer called. "Target 3 reports receiving a disabling hit and has gone dormant. All other targets have sustained only minimal damage. Requesting orders." Pelion grimaced. 1 out of 8 targets, the Chimaera had only been able to hit exactly 1. And that great feat had required 500 shots to achieve. So that was that. The wonderful computerized combat predictor, touted by its creators and sponsors as the best approach to practical use of the cloaking shield, had been put to the test. And to be fair, it had probably done better than simple random shooting. But it hadn't done enough better. Not nearly enough. "Inform adversary commander that the exercise is over," Pelion told the comm officer. "Target 3 may reactivate its systems. All ships are to return to the Chimaera. I want the reports filed within the next 2 hours." "Yes, sir." "I'm sure they'll be able to improve it, Admiral," Ardif said at Pelion's side. "This was just the first field test. Surely they'll be able to improve it." "How?" Pelion retorted. "Train the predictor to be omniscient, or simply teach it how to read our enemies' minds?" "You only gave it 2 passes to study the target's flight patterns," Ardif reminded him. "With more data, it could have better anticipated their movements." Pelion snorted gently. "It's a nice theory, Captain, and under certain controlled situations it might even work. But combat is hardly a controlled situation. There are far too many variables and unknowns, especially considering the hundreds of alien species and combat styles we have to contend with. I knew from the beginning that this predictor idea was probably futile, but it had to be tried." "Well then, we just have to go back to Mark Zero," Ardif said. "Come up with something else. There have to be practical uses for this cloaking shield device." "Of course there are," Pelion agreed heavily. "Grand Admiral Thrawn devised 3 of them himself. But there's no one left in the Empire with his military genius." He sighed. "No, Captain. It's over. It's all over. And we've lost." For a long moment, the low murmur of background conversation was the only sound on the bridge. "You can't mean that, Admiral," Ardif said at last. "And if I may say so, sir, this is not the sort of thing the Supreme Commander of Imperial forces should be talking about." "Why not?" Pelion countered. "It's obvious to everyone else." "It most certainly is not, sir," Ardif said stiffly. "We still hold 8 sectors, over 1,000 inhabited systems. We have the fleet, nearly 200 Star Destroyers strong. We're still very much a force to be reckoned with." "Are we?" Pelion asked. "Are we really?" "Of course we are, sir," Ardif insisted. "How else could we be holding our own against the New Republic?" Pelion shook his head. "We're holding our own for the simple reason that the New Republic is too busy right now with internal squabbling to bother with us." "Which works directly to our advantage," Ardif said. "It's giving us the time we need to reorganize and rearm." "Rearm?" Pelion threw him a quizzical frown. "Have you taken even a cursory look at what we're working with here?" He gestured out the viewport at the prey birds, disappearing now beneath the edge of the Chimaera's hull as they headed for the Star Destroyer's hangar. "Look at them, Captain. Sorosub prey birds. We're reduced to Sorosub prey birds." "There's nothing wrong with the prey birds, sir," Ardif said stubbornly. "They're a quite capable mid-sized starfighter." "The point is that they're not being manufactured by the Empire," Pelion said. "They're being scrounged from who knows where. Probably some fringe pirate or mercenary gang. And they're being scrounged precisely because we're down to a single major shipyard and it can't keep up with the demand for capital ships, let alone starfighters. So tell me how you plan for us to rearm ourselves." Ardif looked out the viewport. "It's still not yet over, sir." But it was. And deep down, Pelion was sure Ardif knew it as well as he did. 1,000 systems left, out of an empire that had once spanned 1,000,000. 200 Star Destroyers remaining from a fleet that had once included over 25,000 of them. And perhaps most telling of all, hundreds of star systems that had once maintained a cautious neutrality were now petitioning the New Republic for membership. They too knew that the outcome was no longer uncertain. Grand Admiral Thrawn could perhaps have breathed the remaining sparks into an Imperial victory, but Grand Admiral Thrawn was gone. Have the navigator plot a course for the Bastion system, Captain, Pelion said to Ardif. Send transmissions to all the Moffs, instructing them to meet me at Moff Disra's palace. We'll leave as soon as the Preybirds are aboard. Yes, Admiral, Ardif said. May I tell the Moffs what the meeting is about? Pelion looked out the viewport at the distant stars. Stars that the Empire had once called theirs. They'd had so much, and somehow it had all slipped through their fingers. Tell them, he said quietly, that it's time to send an emissary to the New Republic to discuss the terms of our surrender. And that's the end of the chapter. Talk to you soon.